Hello, everyone. I'm Chris from AI Events, Airline Information. Welcome to our webinar with Chargebacks 911. Before I pass it over to Harlan and Jimin from Chargebacks, I would just like to give a couple housekeeping items. One is if you have any trouble viewing the session, log out and come back to GoTo. And second, there's a questions box in the GoTo webinar control panel. Please type in your questions. We'll get to them at the end, and we have a special guest to help me field the questions, so we'll introduce her later. But with that, I will turn off my camera and pass it over to Harlan. So good morning, Harlan. Over to you.
Good morning. Glad to see you, Chris, and welcome everybody to this webinar on fraud and chargebacks in our beloved travel industry. We're glad to have you here. You can see my mug up there, and you can scan that QR code for more information. I want to move on to the next slide with my lovely colleague, Jimin. Hello, Jimin.
Hi, evening everyone. Greetings from Singapore, and thank you for joining us today. I'm looking forward to share more later on.
Yes, indeed. So it's evening there. In fact, I'd say it's really nighttime. It's not really evening, right? So you should be maybe in bed
after this. It's 11, but you know, it's always fun to get started and having a morning with the folks there, sharing more about the tips and yourself. I'm looking forward. I'm energized.
Oh, that's great. And we're really appreciative of you staying up late for this. Now, look, here's the topic of the day: fraud and chargebacks in travel. So how travel merchants can fast track the road to recovery in a post-COVID market. We're kind of not in post-COVID, really. I mean, this new Omicron variant and all that, how's that impacting you in Singapore?
I see an improvement. You know, this Omicron, it doesn't seem to affect the momentum that we are moving towards a post-COVID situation. Singapore has fast-tracked to VTL lanes where it's you get to travel without having to quarantine. It's way easier now. It's year-end. People are all starting to resume activities again. So yes, I think it's a positive sign that we are seeing in terms of recovery. Yourself?
Same thing here. We're in the United States. We're able to go pretty much anywhere. We have to wear masks on the airplanes and all that, but there are some signs there might be additional restrictions. California just mandated masks inside. So there's a lot going on. But what we know is that so much of fraud and chargebacks is not related to COVID. It's now related to other things. So let's talk about some of the sort of key insights we got from this survey. By the way, this survey was conducted with over 100 travel merchants, right? And I think about 57% of those merchants were airlines, and then I think 26 were hospitality or hotels. So those kinds of providers, and then travel agents and OTAs and all that made up the rest. What do you think about that from the mix of people who responded to this survey, Jimin?
I think definitely when conducting a survey, it has to be holistic. You need to consider all kinds of players in the travel and aviation scene. So if we talk about airlines, if we talk about hotels, if you even go and interview loyalty program members who are part of this entire ecosystem, it definitely makes sense. So I think the results will show what most of them think about what the survey has been asking, and we will uncover further to see whether it matches what we found out and the reality of the statistics.
So there's a perception and then there's the reality, right?
Yep, definitely.
That's what we want to get to today, is we want to understand the perception, because the survey is really about how does this affect me? What is my view of the world? What has been my experience as a travel provider, either a direct merchant like an airline or a hotel, or an agency that's facilitating the transaction. So let's go through some of the key insights from the survey, and we'll trade off on this, but let's just start with the first one, and then we're going to do a deep dive on each one of these. So nearly half of travel merchants estimate chargebacks are more common when bookings are made directly. Although consumers are increasingly aware of their rights, they're less likely to request chargebacks for indirect bookings. That's an interesting perception. All right, what's the next one?
The next one is airline and travel merchants in particular respond to a higher number of chargebacks as they have access to more direct data to help them with the representment process. As a result, they have a much higher chance of reversing chargebacks. Okay, that's a good question as well.
Yes, it is, and we're going to get into this more, but for third-party providers, not the direct merchants themselves, for example, an OTA has two models that they can use for processing a reservation or a booking or whatever that is. One is the agency model, right? So that's where they're just simply making a reservation with the travel provider or supplier, I should say. And then there's the merchant model. And recently, I think it was about a year ago, Booking.com, I think they went pretty solidly on the merchant model. And more companies that do some sort of, booking that are not the travel providers are moving more towards the merchant model. So we'll get into that, but it's an interesting perception. Airline and travel merchants want to see greater industry collaboration, including integrated technology systems and data sharing, pooling knowledge and resources to identify evolving fraud and chargeback methods. This is going to help everyone, and that's the perception. You came from NSA, right? So you were with a third-party fraud provider where you kind of defeated the fraud thing. What do you think of that one?
I think when it comes to fraud, definitely as a vendor, you would like to see more cohesion in terms of data sharing because it helps, right? If we are working on a similar merchant today, we would wish that we have first-hand knowledge. Hey, there's a red flag on this because of potential activities, or we don't have to repeat the same thing that people failed previously. But of course, it leads to a lot of questions that people are concerned about, which is, how do you protect my data? If I share the data like that, is it going to have a data leak? Do people have access to the business model? So I think these are questions that need to be addressed very carefully. But when the greater goal, I believe that having an industry collaboration might lead to greater benefits.
For sure. And data sharing is tough in any case, not just from a privacy perspective, but also travel merchants are very concerned that their customers stay loyal to them. And I'll say it that way, right? So that's an important. Yep. Finally, merchants using.
Great point.
Merchants using third-party chargeback management solutions cite clear benefits such as revenue recovery, overall cost savings, and reduced chargeback rates. This makes a big difference to their bottom line. We're going to go into that a little bit. And look, we're just full disclosure in case you didn't realize it, in case the audience didn't realize it, we are a third-party chargeback management solution. But let me make something clear here. Our objective from the outset of 10 years of managing chargebacks has always been to provide the best options for our merchants. Sometimes that means telling them we can't help them for whatever reason. And so honestly, it's important to understand that there are clear benefits to that, and there may be good reasons to keep it in-house. Now we're going to get into it. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. We are seeing a high increase of non-fraud chargebacks. I think that the popularization of credit, using credit cards as payment method, is increasing the knowledge of the public about chargebacks procedures. That was from a survey respondent. I think that's so true that more and more consumers, cardholders, understand they can use their banks to accomplish certain purposes, right? Okay.
Yep.
Now, first insight, nearly half of travel merchants estimate chargebacks are more common when bookings are made directly. What do you think of this? Is this a perception that's true, or is it false?
What about the polls first? What did the audience say?
What?
I see you have some statistics there. Well, let's look at the statistics first. I see that 47% of respondents estimate that chargebacks are more common when booked directly with merchants, whereas 28% of respondents say that chargebacks are equally common regardless of channel. And only 16% of respondents said that chargebacks were more common when booked through a travel agency. So Harlan, your question was?
My question is this true or is this false?
I would go for false.
I think that's absolutely the right answer, and the reason for the answer is very, very simple. We talked a little bit early on about the difference between the agency method of making bookings, with the direct supplier being the one processing the payment, and then there's the merchant method, or the merchant use case, where the third-party provider, for example, actually processes the payment. Why is that important in terms of both fraud and chargebacks, but chargebacks in particular?
I think a lot of people have the misconception that if they book directly with an airline or travel hotel, for example, if they are not happy with the service, they don't get the kind of quality they want, then they go for a chargeback. And if it's through a third party or travel agency, they don't do that. But in fact, with Chargebacks 911, we have seen, and it's a reality that consumers these days, they are driven by price point, ease of comparison. You easily go to third party sites. They show you hotel A to Z, all of which in one platform, and you can make quick comparisons. So all of these are met through third-party sites, and it encourages high demands for indirect bookings on third-party sites. And when consumers book through these sites, we have also seen examples where if they found out that they're not able to use or earn points through their loyalty programs, they may end up turning to direct bookings and file chargebacks on their indirect bookings to recover their revenue. So most third-party sites, they also outsource their customer service departments, which can make the customer service experience poor or hard for consumers to make changes in their reservations. So all of these factors can actually add to indirect bookings being more prone to subjected to high chargebacks, which is why my answer is false, because irregardless of which is the merchant of record, the number of chargebacks remains equally high for both sides.
Yeah, I would agree 100% with that, and I would also say that what's amazing about third-party providers often is that they are experts at marketing. You kind of alluded to this, right? Like they know how to build offers so well, and they're just out there doing this thing, and especially when they're doing the merchant model, the model where they're processing the payment, they're completing everything across the board, and then they're just delivering the customer, say, to a hotel. And my wife loves, I'll say it, Priceline. She loves to get on Priceline and just book our hotel. She just wants to be done with it and paid for and all that. Well, that in and of itself is an opportunity for a chargeback, because the more marketing, the more better you are at it, all that kind of thing. You're going to get a lot more transactions, but you're also going to have people, when they're dissatisfied and they want a refund, they're going to go not to the supplier, because guess what? When they call their bank, the one who processed the payment is in fact where the chargeback is going to lie, because it's not really the consumer's choice as to who gets the chargeback. It's specifically who processed the payment, right?
Yeah.
Now, what about fraud? How does this relate to chargebacks that are specific around fraud? Or do you have any thoughts about that? Not friendly.
Yes. Mm-hmm. In fact, as I was mentioning, consumers these days, they are driven by price point, ease of comparison. There's loads of activities going online as well. People know the system. People know that when a chargeback happens, it is the onus of the merchant to prove that the chargeback, to prove the validity of the transaction, right? Otherwise, they will just have to bear the cost of a chargeback, and the merchant easily wins the money back because chargebacks usually favors the consumers. So I think with that in mind, and people that have actually tried to file chargebacks before learned that, hey, actually it's pretty easy. If I get even fraudsters which get ease of data leaks nowadays online, there are increasing amounts of fraud, criminal fraud happening, which lead to more and more people falling for chargebacks. And in fact, with loyalty programs, I mean, just digressing a little, with hotels and airlines that focus a lot on loyalty programs, and with consumers, I mean, the customers of loyalty programs not having tight security on their own loyalty programs, fraudsters can easily go onto these platforms to steal the passwords to sell the loyalty programs, which eventually can lead to big chargebacks problems as well. So I think with more increment in such activities, definitely fraud is closely linked to chargebacks. And when I say fraud, I think it includes friendly fraud, which is consumers that are aware and are owners of their own credit card, and also criminal fraud, where consumers that are using fraudulent credit card to make transactions.
Yep. Awesome. That is fantastic. All right, let's go to the next slide here and the next key insight. Your turn.
Is a question? Yeah, that's a question for you, Harlan. So you are a travel expert, right? Your family, they book tickets. You yourself have been in the travel space for a long time, and you've met with loads of travel merchants, loads of travel customers as well. So this question is for you. Airline and travel merchants are more likely to respond to chargebacks if the reservation is made directly with them rather than through a travel agency. And this is because they have access to first-hand evidence to help with their response. What would you think of this?
So this is a really interesting question, right? So you can see the graph here, right? The perception is that the sales channel does not impact chargeback response rates. Now, not chargeback rates, but how we respond to them, right? It doesn't, it's so interesting that it has no impact on that at all. Slightly below that at 31%, right? It's slightly less likely to respond to a chargeback if the reservation is booked through a travel agency. Now, there's a lot of sort of industry complexity here. For example, in the airline world, the airlines, at least to some extent, have the option, right? The option of not fighting a chargeback, right? That has come through a travel agent, but then issuing an agency debit memo. It's really a form of chargeback that is pretty specific to the airlines, right? And I don't remember how many different reasons there are, but most ADMs are kind of for things like fare differences, right? Like if the agent charged $435.85 and it was actually $440.85, then that agency debit memo can correct that, right? They can get their money back and all that. It's interesting to note that the chargebacks only represent about 9%, according to ARC a few years ago. The Airline Reporting Corporation only represent about 9% of all agency debit memos. The difference, though, and this is important, is that 9% in terms of the number of debit memos actually goes up to 42%, I think it was, or maybe it was 47% of the total dollar value or monetary value of that thing. So look, here's my point, is that the airlines have another option. If they don't fight it, or if they lose it, they can actually go back to the agency. So in reality, right, it can impact it, right? I will tell you that the direct supplier has most of the information through maybe their GDS or some other connection that they have, but it's more difficult to get data on a particular customer cardholder from an OTA, for example. So the question is, true or false? We're going to say hardly true anyway, because there's a perception that if it was booked through a travel agent, I might be able to just issue a debit memo. So it could affect the response rates from the travel provider. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you've provided a great amount of details and points, but I also think that one very important factor for a merchant to win a chargeback, is to provide accurate, compelling evidence to justify the legitimacy of a transaction. And because of this, it is very important for merchants to maintain accurate and detailed records from the very beginning. Now, these carefully documented transactions are very crucial for winning a chargeback dispute. And I think it also answers to the question, because if this is the case, then working through a third-party agent may not give the airlines or hotels direct access or transparency into all these data in the beginning, right? Which makes it difficult for them to put compelling records or even invoices, evidence of communication. So if they realize that because of this, they don't get to win a chargeback as easily, that may deter them from even wanting to fight the chargebacks and pursue a debit memo instead. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's all good. Hey, I think we should have a poll question here. What do you think? I think we should ask the audience, and these are for the direct travel suppliers, right? The direct travel suppliers. I want to know, inquiring minds want to know, if you get a chargeback today, are you more likely or less likely? And this is a whole different audience than we're on the original survey. Are you more likely to respond or less likely to respond? And as a follow-on, if you want to put in there, I'm less likely to respond and I'm an airline because I use agents and debit memos, that would be even better information. So maybe we'll get some insight on that at the end of the.
Harlan, hold on, I got a program in this one. I don't have that one.
I know. Well, I'm improvising now.
I can do that. I can do it. Let me put it in. So what I'll do this for you, but what is the question? So are you more likely to respond or less likely to respond to through a travel agency?
So the question is for direct travel suppliers, that would be airlines, hotels, car rental agency. If you're a car rental agency, are you more likely or less likely to respond to a chargeback that comes from a third-party booking source, OTA, regular travel agency, that kind of thing? Does that make sense?
Yep. Give me a minute. Keep talking, and I'll try to program this in. So we'll see what's going on.
All right. I threw you a curveball. You're a good sport, man. Okay. All right.
What's next?
This is mine, right? Airline and travel merchants want to see greater industry collaboration. We kind of touched on that a little bit. So tell me, Jimin, what is your thinking more around this specific to data sharing? Because you mentioned that, and I just want to get your sense of how people feel about that. Let's look at the question first and the responses.
Do you think greater system collaboration could improve chargeback and refund processes? And overwhelmingly, 62% of respondents said they want to see greater platform and system collaboration in this area, and just 8% of merchants were against greater collaboration, which is a mystifying response, but also because it concerns ease of integration, cost, and also fear of rights to communicate from other solution providers. Yeah, it goes back to your point, Harlan, just now where you say competitors, you want to have the data to yourself because you want to keep a loyalty program for your customers. Yeah, I think it's a great question, but it's very realistic and relevant question in our generation today, specifically as we're moving into a more data-savvy economy. I would say collaboration is actually key to successful fraud prevention. The ideal world and big data, predictive analytics have led to higher success rates in terms of being able to identify fraudulent transactions, helping merchants gain an improved understanding of fraudulent behaviors. You know, in fact, with Chargebacks 911, we have also started being more collaborative with front-end fraud vendors in the sense we actually feed post-transaction chargebacks data to the merchants pre-fraud filters because we want to enhance the entire payments barrier, right? We want to increase the protection from front to back end. So I think this has helped merchants a lot. And I think by pulling data points together to shed more light on investigations, suspicious transactions, organizations can actually be more effective in combating the most high risk or destructive types of fraud. Because, you know, as a third party vendor, I don't want to be doing the same thing that another vendor might have done before and realized and explored before, but because this data was not passed on to me, I have to redo it all over again. And of course, I think, you know, to answer the question, if a merchant is, or rather if vendors are sensitive over data sharing, hey, this is not about sharing the entire data, right? It's about sharing suspicious data, which can help combat fraud on a bigger scale.
Yep.
I'm actually sharing this because I did a bit of a research and I found that, you know, there was a LexisNexis study that conducted and it pointed to the fact that mitigation professionals from all industries are actually embracing this type of solution. So the percentage of those who responded on this year's study that they would highly consider contributing the outcomes of fraud cases to a centralized solution jumped from 44% in 2017 to 52% this year. So I think it speaks a lot for itself. What do you think, Harlan?
Absolutely, that's great stuff. Oh, Chris, you popped in here.
And by the way, I heard some. I'm a big fan of the LexisNexis cybersecurity report, so everyone can Google that. It's great. It comes out, I think, like twice a year or something. It's very good. So a big fan of that one. And let's hope I programmed the poll correctly. This is the first in the history of a live poll that I was programming as it went on. Did I get it right, Harlan? Travel merchants, are you
likely to respond to respond to chargebacks initiated by third-party providers like OTAs, travel agents, that kind of thing? Yep.
So more or less I got it right. So if some of the people listed on second screen, come over to the first screen and vote. So are you more likely to respond, less likely to respond, or don't know? So you want to just explain it again one more time, Harlan, so we make sure people are voting on the right poll?
Absolutely. So for direct or direct travel suppliers, that would be airlines, hotels, car rental companies like Avis, Budget Group, any of those types of suppliers. If you get a chargeback, are you more or less likely to respond to a booking that comes from a third-party provider like an OTA? Could be Priceline, Expedia, any of those kind of things. Could be a regular travel agency, etc. So that's really the poll.
Okay, so yeah, most of our people have voted, so I'll share the results with you. So you can see 42% more, 23% less, and 35% don't know. So I don't know if that's in line with the results or what you expected, but there's the results there.
It's very much in line with the results. I think that 31% was the highest, more likely, and I can't see the poll, but and then it was 30.
So
30.
it's more. This one is more 42, less 23, don't know 35.
Yep. That's pretty well in line, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay. So now they can see us again. I'll turn off my camera, and if you have any more on the spot polls, just let me know. I'll program them in, and we'll do live polling.
Well, I apologize for pulling that fast one on you. So okay, so great stuff on the industry collaboration, and by the way, thanks everyone for participating in this sort of improvised poll. Really appreciate it. Good information there.
By the way, we did get a comment. I'll read to you, and they said that there should be a third option, that you respond to everything regardless.
That, you know what? Great point. Because in reality, your dispute rate, that's the rate at which you respond to chargebacks, has a direct impact upon your actual net win rate. Someday, Chris, we'll do another thing on chargeback dispute and win rates. All right, it's a really fascinating topic, but good point. So okay, so collaboration. I just want to say one thing about collaboration.
Yep.
Regulatory forces, right? And thinking about the EU, for example, with GDPR, right? They make it very uncomfortable, and rightly so, to share any data with any sort of data that contains PII, personally identifiable information. Very uncomfortable, and you get fined and all that kind of stuff. So what is the solution here? I think part of the solution is working with third-party providers. We're one of those, for example. We have consortium data that is anonymized, right, that we use through our dispute intelligence tool, right? We have this anonymized data that's consortium data that can inform the travel merchant, right? But in addition to that, you also have incredible, I'll call them industry players like, well, AI, for example, Airline Information, who host events where fraud is discussed, fraud trends are uncovered and exposed. I mean, these are tremendous things. The Global Fraud Summit with IATA, that's a great event where, and you know, it hasn't taken place since the pandemic, but the Global Fraud Summit is a great place. If you're a travel provider and you want to know, you go to Global Fraud Summit, right? So symposium, I think it is. So the industry is stepping up here, and they are creating opportunities to share data in a safe, non sort of exposing way. So I'm very happy with that. So let's look at this. Is this a dream or a reality, Jamin?
I think it's a dream soon to come true.
A dream becoming true. I love that, because in reality, yes, I agree. It's not.
I mean, yeah, the reality is we are still not entirely there, but definitely we are seeing signs of it. So it's a great improvement.
Yeah, great improvement. And I think, and I just want to say another thing, and this is not a commercial, but if you choose a chargeback management firm, and we have an agnostic approach to fraud providers. In other words, we will share negative chargeback data, right, with your fraud provider, whether that's your internal tool, whether it's a third-party provider, whatever that is. And again, it's a secure process. It's safe, but negative chargeback data can inform the way you receive, analyze, and decide or make decisioning processes with your chargebacks that come in. So, all right, great. Last one. You want to read
Last
this?
one for you, Harlan. So merchants using third-party chargeback management solutions cite clear benefits such as revenue recovery, overall cost savings, and reduced chargeback rates. This makes a big difference to their bottom line. Okay, so what's the question?
So so is this a reality? This is a great thing. So the perception here is that using a third-party chargeback management solution has clear benefits.
Mm-hmm.
That's the perception. Now what do the survey results show? Over 87% of respondents said that they were currently managing chargebacks in-house. Interesting.
That's very true.
While only 10% were using third-party management solutions. So I think this is a very, very interesting problem. I think it's changed a little bit with the pandemic, right?
So Harlan, my question to you is this a good idea or is this a bad idea?
So that is a really interesting thing, and I'm going to answer that in a minute. Let's look at the data here, though, of those that you respond to. So now remember, 87% were currently doing it in-house, right? Of those chargebacks that you respond to, approximately what percent are reversed? Well, the largest percentage, right, is really, really interesting here, 26 to 50%. That's like, I don't know, something around what, 29%, right? So even those people who are responding to their chargebacks, right, and they're doing it as effectively as they can, they're still getting really a fairly low reversal rate.
Mm-hmm.
So my thought here is that we said that the survey respondents said that there's clear benefits, revenue recovery, overall cost savings, and reduced chargeback rates. So is this a good idea to do it on your own? This is your question, right? Or is it a bad idea, right? And for me, I think it's a good idea until it's a bad idea. And what I mean by that, frankly, is look, doing it on your own, if you're getting high win rates on a high number of disputed cases, continuing to do it on your own is something you should do, right? So what do I mean by that? We talked a little bit about dispute rate as opposed to the net win rate. So when we think about how you calculate a dispute rate, you start, or a win rate, you start with how many disputes or how many chargebacks you actually challenge, right? So if you have 100 chargebacks and you dispute only 50% of them, right? But you win 70% of that 50%, that's 35% win rate, right? Kind of okay, but then if you add in the inevitable second cycle cases, which would lead to arbitration, which I will tell you that travel agents that, or the travel providers rather, that I know, they have a high average order value or average ticket value, transaction value. So more cases are going to go to second cycle or arbitration than not. So if you have a 35% win rate and you lose 20% of those to second cycle, right? You're talking about being in the 20% win rate, right? So it's super important to remember that it's really all about how many do you dispute, the evidence that you give for the case. Do you have all the evidence? Do you know how to package it up? Do you know how to communicate and tell the story? And once you do that, are you getting the response rates that you think are important and helpful? And I'm sorry, I moved to the next slide. I'm very happy with this little button here. So what do you think of that?
I wanted to say I agree, because when we talk with merchants, I realize that there is always this illusion of cost saving. So merchants, they often have the illusion that if they keep the management of chargebacks and fraud in-house, that would mean higher cost savings. But however, merchants actually neglect to consider the amount of resources in terms of manpower, time allocated to handle these. And also the eventual win rates, which, as to your point, you're mentioning that merchants mostly don't have the bandwidth to manage all the entire chargebacks. So they do selective disputes, and out of the selective disputes, they don't also track how many of those eventually become second cycle chargebacks, which greatly reduce their efforts of win rate, even though they might have kept it in-house and thought that they are saving money. Because when we speak, I realize, Harlan, when we speak with merchants, we often find out that merchants, first of all, they don't store much of the essential data required to win a chargeback, which makes it difficult for them to effectively respond to 100% of chargebacks in the first place. And that aside, merchants also, they usually don't have a specialized or dedicated team that focuses on chargebacks or risk itself, because such responsibilities would usually be assigned to the finance team, which are often swamped with billing or accounting aspects of the business to really focus on chargebacks. So I think all these, when added up together, merchants end up not sparing any time or effort to keep updated on latest fraud trends and rules, which eventually leads to them suffering from really low win rates despite the efforts to maintain chargebacks in-house.
100%. I want to point out a couple of things. The problem with managing it in-house is you're kind of in this silo, right? And what about the rule changes that happen every year on chargebacks? I remember in 2019, I believe it was, there were 147 rule changes, including Visa, MasterCard, American Express, all that, but also regulatory changes like SCA, I think, came into play. That's strong customer authentication. And if you cannot keep up with the rules, you will fall down when it comes to responding to your chargebacks. Because if the rule is changed for evidence, right, compelling evidence for 10.4, for example, Visa 10.4, then what is going to happen when you respond? If you don't supply the new evidence, you're going to lose that case. So you have to be a compliance specialist, right? You have to understand fraud. You have to know all of these regulatory things like SCA. Am I one leg into Europe and I'm, with the transaction in the US and this and that and the other. There's such a myriad of things that happen when it comes to chargebacks and fraud that you better be an expert. You better have experts on your team, right, who know the rules, know how to respond, or you should hire one, right? That goes back to our third-party thing. And this is not a commercial. This is just a reality. If you can't become an expert or don't have an expert you can rely on to keep up with this, you should hire one. All right. Now the big revelation. Yes. What is the big revelation? Well, let's talk about it a little bit. Friendly fraud. What is friendly fraud? We hear a lot about that, but look at this chart here and tell me what you think. What percent of your chargebacks would you estimate are caused by friendly fraud? Give me your thoughts on that, Xiaomin.
Let's see here. What percent of your chargebacks would you estimate are caused by friendly fraud? And the polls have suggested that more than close to 50% of merchants think that just only 0 to 10% of chargebacks are caused by friendly fraud, and less than 10% of them think that more than 80% of them are caused by friendly fraud. Well, that's a very surprising finding, and I shouldn't be surprised, right? Because as I mentioned, merchants, they have the illusion of cost saving. Sometimes, without real statistics, it can blind you in a way of what's really happening with chargebacks as well. So I think education for this kind of conversation is definitely essential. And you know what, Harlan, the reality is 50 to 80% of chargebacks are actually caused by friendly fraud. So yeah, I think, now that brings us to a great point, which is the revelation. So just a bit of statistics sharing. More than 40% of increment in chargebacks have been noticed over the past 3 years, particularly in the last couple of years, driven by COVID and high online activities. Close to 70% of chargebacks are due to friendly fraud. Yes, we can talk more about this later on. And more than 80% of customers admit to filing a chargeback simply out of convenience. Well, I would have to agree because, I've encountered this before. I purchased stuff online. The merchant was so hard to get to. It was an overseas website. I just went to the bank straight.
Yep. Well, and this, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Now, I was just going to say the last part is 50% of the consumers who actually did it admit that they will do it again within the next 60 days. I don't know if the 60 days is that accurate, but for myself, when I saw how easy it was to get my money back from the bank, yeah, I'm actually encouraged as a consumer to just go to the bank. What do you think?
I think this is all true. So we look at the world in 3 buckets, right? There's 3 reasons for chargebacks. There's dozens of reason codes, but there's really 3 reasons. Fraud, that would be, true criminal fraud, account takeovers, that sort of thing. That's one bucket. There's merchant caused chargebacks. Now, what do I mean by that? That's merchant error, right? You're doing something that's causing your company to receive more chargebacks. Might be a service-related issue. Could be you're sending the wrong product, or you're giving the wrong seat to the passenger. The hotel room was dirty. I mean, there's service-related issues. Those could be what we call merchant error chargebacks. And then finally, this bigger bucket of friendly fraud or first-party fraud. There is customer error in there, and there's some bank error in there. But look, I think if you're going to be handling your chargebacks, you've got to remember that customer expectations can lead to using the bank, right, as a refund tool, right? Instead of calling the merchant. I think the statistic is 16% of cardholders call the merchant first. 16% call the merchant first to get a refund. 84% call their bank first. That's a huge deal right there, right? Buyer's remorse. I first class to Europe. No, I didn't do this, but let's say that I bought a ticket for first class to Europe. It cost me $15,000. And I get home and I think, I don't have $15,000 to pay for this. Buyer's remorse is a big thing, right? So there's a lot of these things that we think about that we're like, oh, I don't know, that's friendly fraud, even though it's something different. So here's the stats on criminal fraud. 0 to 30% is really when a customer's information is stolen. Merchant error 10 to 40%, and then these fluctuate depending upon the merchant. And then friendly fraud, we see most even reason codes that come in as fraudulent. They are not that indeed. Okay. Yes.
I wanted to say, just before you close it, I think that with that statistics that you shared is a very good sign for merchants that are struggling with chargebacks to realize that friendly fraud is the greatest part of the area where you can recover your revenue. So if you focus on this 50 to 80%, essentially it's a huge part of the chargebacks you receive. Reasons that different customers can always give to the bank may be the same. It's always fraud. But if you look into the data, if you look into the merchant record that you keep of your customers, you will realize that, hey, this may be a repeat customer, or this customer has not recognized the transaction, maybe because of the code of the receipt. It could be my merchant error, but it could be resolved if I were to manage all these in a more proper manner. So I think it's a good takeaway for merchants out there to realize that actually it's more the bulk of the chargebacks that are contributed by friendly fraud. And with that in mind, you do not have to worry. With proper measures in place, these revenue can be greatly recovered.
Yep. I could not have said it better myself. It's been great to talk with you. I know it's late there, Chris. Take us out of this.
And I also have a surprise for you, a surprise to help me ask a couple questions. We have some questions from the audience, and Sandra from Microsoft. I'm surprising you with Sandra from Microsoft. So can you turn on your ear? So nice to see you, Sandra. How are you? So I know you're a merchant and a provider, and you're moving into the travel space heavily. You're partnered with Chargebacks 911. So I thought you know more about fraud than me. So why don't you? What were your impressions? Did you have any questions for Harlan and Jimin?
Just some observations. You mentioned that people were asking for technology solutions to talk to one another for that data sharing. It's really important to have that industry collaboration. And I think that from Microsoft's perspective, we're a merchant, we're a provider of fraud technology, and partnering with people like Chargebacks 911 gives that collaboration approach. So it's really important for people to look at their systems, look at what they're doing today, and kind of get into the 22nd century, if you will. The legacy systems of the past, they're all great. They all serve a purpose, but as fraudsters are getting smarter, we need to use technology to outsmart them.
Yeah, and Sandra, what we love about you and the Microsoft, not just the technology but the team, is that incredible. I'll call it that critical mass, right, of knowledge, experience, and understanding of the problem, right? So when we think about how do you understand what a merchant is going through?
Exactly.
You're a merchant, right? You have been a merchant. You're probably one of the most massive merchants. You probably have more data on transacting. I don't even know, you're just so massive with all of the various products that Microsoft sells. So what does that mean for you when you think about collaborating with your merchants? What does that mean to Microsoft? I'm gonna push the questions back at you.
That's okay. It's really utilizing that consortium approach, like we said, right? So taking that data, but in a safe, compliant, GDPR manner, everything is de-identified, one-way salted hashed. So we sit on top of Azure. So we have certain rules and protocols that we must follow as Microsoft, right? So when we're adding all those data points, it's just not looking at the travel market or one airline in particular. We're looking at everything from state and local governments to national governments to retailers, gaming companies. Microsoft is customer zero. You have a plethora of data that most people just don't know what to do with. So it's important to have those experts, those data scientists who are top in their field to really interpret that data and look for those patterns of fraud protection. And how can we prevent a chargeback from it even occurring in the first place? That transaction from even starting, that whole 360-degree view is really important to the industry.
Yep. All right, question.
There is a question from the audience, and it was for Jimin. It says, Jimin, in a case where a customer makes a charge out just because they weren't able to use the services, for example, they're a no-show at the airport, they raise a chargeback. The airline needs documentation to verify this. So, how do they fight it with it if they can't raise the proper documentation? So, this is an age-old question, but how do you recommend that they handle such a situation?
Is this a merchant saying that the customer purchased the ticket, there was a no-show, and the customer wants a refund but files a chargeback in the case?
Yes.
Well, I think it's very important. As I mentioned, chargebacks goes back to keeping compelling evidence, data, and transparency of communication. I think right before the front end of the transaction, it's important to take note of metrics, right? Like how often has this consumer been coming onto my site to make a purchase? Is it within milliseconds? If that is the case, it might indicate that it's not a sincere purchase. It's a purchase meant to file for a chargeback at a later stage. What were the communications given to the customer? Was there email confirmation? Was there any terms and conditions that the customer had to indicate a tick or acknowledge before he could check out? Things like that would be very important for the airline to keep track of and to provide it to the card issuer or the bank at hand to really assess, because when a customer can just say, hey, it's fraud, but the truth is there was a no-show and I want my money back. But with all this evidence coming in, reminders sending in, and you indicating that you acknowledge the receipt and you indicated you acknowledge the terms and conditions, it greatly helps the merchant better prepare for chargebacks.
Excellent. So since we're getting towards the end of the hour, I'll give each one of you a final word, like one thing you want people to remember. Start with Sandra. So everything that you heard today, Sandra, what do you think people should take home with them?
I think that people are becoming more and more informed. As you said, that the credit card users are becoming more informed. So is the audience, right? So are we in the industry becoming more adept at changing things and making sure that we have the most up-to-date tools. So that would be my takeaway, is take a look at your tool. Make sure you don't have to say chargebacks is just a cost of doing business, right? You can mitigate that and you can turn that into a revenue stream.
So, and I will ask you, Harlan, but I'll make a comment. You said that about changing regulations. I suspect that you guys know more about chargeback sometimes than the people in the card schemes themselves, because the card schemes are doing many things, right? So you're specialized in this one aspect. I bet sometimes they call you for questions. I wouldn't doubt it. That's my experience. But
yes, our COO has been on. I can't remember it's a MasterCard sort of advisory board. She's been on that for years, and so yes, we help to inform and work with the card brands, because in reality, you're right, they do many other things, and this is a very niche sort of thing. If I may, I want to piggyback on something that Jamin said about how to respond. I think before you respond, take a very close look at your processes, right? Take a look at how your processes might actually be leading to chargebacks. And an example of that, before the pandemic, man, if you got a non-refundable ticket, you were sunk, right? You were absolutely sunk. What we've seen coming out of this pandemic is travel providers are giving more flexibility, right? They realize that if we go into another shutdown, they may have to give money back. So they're allowing for more booking flexibility, more like, okay, yeah, this is non-refundable, but if you cancel, then you've got a year to use this ticket, whatever it is, right? So I think being more consumer and cardholder centric will help you in these instances where there's an upset customer, right? Just wanting a refund or couldn't make the flight or whatever that might be. Be more flexible, look at your processes, and then by all means either become an expert or hire one. That's true for fraud, that's true for chargebacks, and that's all I got to say.
Okay, and Jimin, the final word, what would you like people to remember from today?
I think merchants in general, they feel afraid to reach out to third-party vendors, either because they think that it's going to be a hefty sum to have these solutions, or hey, I'm just going to go into a sales pitch. But I think more importantly, it should be a different approach. The thinking should be, I can rely on these people for information, even as simple as coming onto our website, downloading reports, just asking the experts questions, but not even engaging in any product. I think it helps to also get more awareness from the experts how to better manage the chargeback. So I think the takeaway from me is, do not afraid to reach out, because you might end up benefiting way more from the knowledge than you expect.
And you mentioned download the report. There it is. So everyone can download the report that you referred to today. Use that QR code and download the Chargebacks 911 report on chargebacks in the airline in travel industry. So with that, I'd like to thank Sandra for coming in, stepping in out of the audience, and especially to Harlan and G-Min for sharing with us today. And
Thanks, Bruce.
hope to see you at a future webinar. We'll be back in January with more webinars. So see you all then. And thank you to Chargebacks 911 and the audience and Sandra, and signing off. So we'll see you next year.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.